I started this project 20 years ago, and over the course of 5 years I travelled all over the state, visiting 180 towns in order to photograph the colonial churches, that is, churches built before independence in 1821. So what you'll see tonight are snippets of my travels all over the state. In here you can see in green are the main towns in each municipality, and the pink are all the commissarias, or the smaller towns which have colonial churches. Okay. The Franciscan order was the only order that took part in the evangelization of the Yucatán. The Dominicans, Augustinians, etc. were in other parts of the country, but only the Franciscans here, and they arrived 3 years after the conquest, and they had an enormous impact on the early colonial life of the state. They established, apart from the churches, the first schools, the first hospitals. They fought with the landowners to protect the indigenous people who the landowners wanted to use as slaves. And for this reason they came into conflict also with the governors of the state. And little by little the governors took the churches from them and gave them to what were called the secular clergy. These are the clergy that we know today that aren't affiliated with any particular order. The Franciscans then were the ones who built most of the colonial churches in Yucatán, and their churches were almost always like there's a plain facade with just a little bit of decoration around the doorway and maybe the window of the chorus above. In some of the churches you can see the Franciscan insignia. Here, the crossed arms of Jesus and St. Francis. Here again, the crossed arms of Jesus and St. Francis. Here again, and here, Brother Sun and Sister Moon from the Canticle of St. Francis. And here, not very clear, the crossed arms, and here you can see I hope you can see, 5 wounds. These are the 5 wounds of Christ on the cross, which appeared on the body of Francis of Assisi. He was the first recorded stigmata in history. And this is a symbol of the Franciscan order. The facade of the church was topped by what's called an espadana, this business here, and Miguel Bretos says that the Yucatán is the land of the espadana. There are all kinds, high and low, slim and squat, ugly and pretty, made to hold bells, or, as in Tishkuitun, this one, just to be seen, like the roof crests of the Mayan temples. And here are a collection of some of the different espadañas that you can find on the churches around Yucatán. Inside the church there was usually a barrel vault with what are called rollizos. These, what have I done, Scott? Okay, these wooden rollizos, which is just the local timber used to support the barrel vault of the roof. This is in Calakmul, which is in the east of the state, and this retablo, which has survived, is considered one of the best in the state. The Here is a closer up of that retablo in Calotmul. On the northern and southern sides of the church, there were smaller altars built into the thickness of the wall, or sometimes chapels carved out of the thickness of the wall. These four is a set from Hoktun, and they're a nice example of the lateral altars. In Calotmul, the altars are carved out of the outside walls of the church instead of the inside wall, which is strange and unique to this church. The convent was always on the northern side of the church because the northern side was cooler and protected by the church. In some cases, here is a one-story, but many of them were 2 stories. Here is a plan of Zitzantun from a huge volume that I found in the State Archives called A Catalogue of Religious Constructions. This was immensely useful because it had every religious instruction described with plans and elevations of all of them. This is Zitzantun. You can see here the church, incredible church of Zitzantun, the entrance, the cloister and communal rooms on the bottom floor, and if there was a second floor, the cells for the friars and priests would be above. Behind the church was, or the convent, was the garden, or huerta it's called, and this is the entrance to a garden that's disappeared in Tishkakal-Tuyub, and beside the church, usually, not in this case, but beside the church usually was the cemetery, and this is the entrance to the cemetery in Tishkakal-Tuyub. Beyond the main church, there was a network of smaller towns, and in each of these smaller towns, there was, these were called visita, there was a small chapel. The chapel was just three rooms, one on the side, here the sanctuary, and here the sacristy. And here was a pole and thatch ramada where the faithful gathered to worship. In time, the ramada here was replaced by a masonry church, and this is what you see here in A1, which is a commissariat of Tishkakal. In these small towns where you see a church like this, you will always see at the back a small belfry like this, indicating that this was originally a visita chapel and the church was constructed later. To get up onto the roof, there was a ladder, a tower. This one is outside. This is the same idea, but this one is open to the elements. But you can see from the photo that I climbed up there and stood on the edge to take this photo. It's in pretty good condition, considering it's 17th century, and open to whatever happens, including hurricanes. This is the first church I want to show you, and it's a good example of a dedication plaque, a primitive dedication plaque, indicating the dedication of the church. You can read here the date, the month, the year, años. I'm not sure what this means. But this then was a little church dedicated on the 19th of July in 1640. The interior of the church was very disappointing. As you can see, it's dingy and not very exciting. There's no retablo or altarpiece at the back here, and that's because the original roof had fallen. This is a replacement, pretty ugly, and and so are these posts. We were lucky to get inside because a gremio or a guild had just been and gone, and the side door was still open, and so we got inside and we were able to take photos, although there wasn't much except here against this back wall there was a Cristo Negro, or a Black Christ, and there are only 5 or 6 of these in all of Yucatán, so that was interesting. We met the priest, a very old priest who'd been in this parish for 30 years, and he said, go up to the roof, go up to the roof. So we went up to the roof and came down again, and he said, would you like to see the storeroom? Okay, so he opened the door at the back here, the back wall, and took us into the storeroom. And here, behind that horrible wall, was the original sanctuary of the church before the roof fell. Here's the original altarpiece, and look at the painting. This was 20 years ago. I don't know whether it's still there, whether they've preserved it or what's happened to it. If anyone's passing through Chicxulub Pueblo, have a look. More paintings here, and still more. You can even read this almost. It says something to the effect that you can drink the water and you will still be thirsty, but I am the fount of water that gives eternal life. You can see here the words vida eterna. So that's the first of the churches. In Chumayel was found one of the most important Mayan history texts, the Chilam Balam of Chumayel. This is the original church here, facing west, as they all should do, but the dome over the sanctuary collapsed, and they built a new church at right angles to the old one. So this new church faces south, which is very rare and shouldn't be allowed. Anyway, this is the retablo inside, which has been restored. There's a nice glass door here. The sacristan insisted on opening this door so that I could take photos, and this is another Black Christ loaded with milagros, which people give to a statue or the crucifix, praying for help of some kind. I used to collect these, and you can get every part of the body that you want, and any part that has a pain, buy that milagro and stick it on the cross or the statue or wherever, and pray for relief from whatever ails you. In Concal, there's almost a triple nave to the church, but the side naves have been divided up into lateral chapels. Most unusual, the design of these chapels, and they're quite large. And you can see here, you can pass from one chapel to the other right down the length of the church. Really interesting construction. While I was there, they were rebuilding the convent, and it eventually became the Museum of Sacred Art. Then after a little while it closed, and I don't know what's happened to it now. Anyone from Concal here? If you go there to visit, and it's worth a visit, check that the Museum of Sacred Art is open. Here is what's called a noria. This is built over a cenote, and there are half a dozen of these in different churches. And this is the high technology of the colonial era. A mule was used to work the pump, which obtained the water, stored the water, and distributed it to the fields or to the domestic use. This is Zemul, a restored retablo. This was completely dismantled and cleaned, completely cleaned and treated with insecticide to prevent any kind of infestation, and reattached to the wall with 18 new wooden pins, painted and decorated with 23.5 carat gold leaf. What's more interesting about this church is this business here. This is called a Camino de Rondo. It runs around the church from the sanctuary through the choir and back to the sanctuary. And in other places it was used for military purposes, but that's not the case here. So it's not sure what the purpose of this was. Some say that it was for maintenance. But maintenance of what? The thick walls that it was built into? I don't know. Zemul is unique because it has two Caminos de Ronda, one here and one there. In Yucatán, these are called Gallina Ciega, which literally means the blind hen, but in fact is the name of the children's game Blind Man's Buff. Why it has this name in Yucatán, I don't know. In other parts of Mexico, it's called Camino de Ronda, walk around. Here is a better view of the double Camino de Ronda, unique in Yucatán. Here is the church of Tzitzantún, the greatest Franciscan edifice in Yucatán, 78 meters in length, 11 meters wide, very ambitious construction. In fact, so ambitious that after some time they had to start supporting the southern wall on this side, but even with that, eventually the roof fell in. Well, I say eventually, after 300 years or so, so it lasted a fair while. And now inside the church is just this huge concrete slab. The interesting thing about Tzitzantún is that at the time that I was there, the main restorer of INA, the National Institute of Anthropology and History, said that without urgent intervention, the 600 meters of mural painting in the convent would be lost. And at the time I was there, this is what they looked like. There were paintings of saints, doctors of the church, the Virgin and Christ, of course. Here's a particularly good one. You can see here the 5 wounds of the Franciscan insignia, and this pigment called Maya blue, which was used in pre-Hispanic times, and you may have noticed this was pretty lavishly splashed around in Mel Gibson's film Apocalypse. If you remember, there was a lot of blue in that film. I went to this little town outside of Valladolid called Edtun, not knowing very much about it, but I knew there was a church there, and the entrance gate has a date of 1567, so it's fairly early. The church is plain, as you can see, the facade is plain. There was a local woman passing by, and I said to her, "Oh, what do you call this church?" Thinking she would tell me. And she said, "Well, we call it the church." Okay, thank you. Here's another little church. The town is even smaller. You can see again, this one has lost its roof. This is way out east. In fact, the name of the municipality. Chiquin means east, and Sonot, Cenote. So this is in the municipality of the Cenote of the east. And this little church with this little town has lost its roof. It looks pretty impressive inside. I think these few pews here are probably enough for the Catholic congregation, because this area, the evangelical movement is very strong in this area. And at the time I was there, the commissario, or the head of the town council, was a member of the evangelical church. And he wouldn't give any money to the Catholics to celebrate their festivities. I hope this year they can, because Friday will be a big day in this church, the Church of the Three Kings. This is Hokaba, San Francisco de Asís, and again we were invited to go up onto the roof, where you can see the really interesting landscape of Yucatán here. But more importantly, you can see the work that the government, the state government, was doing in 55 of the 106 municipalities. They undertook to repair and restore the structure of the church and to cover it with this acrylic seal, which you probably have on your own houses. What's interesting here is this manga, or sleeve, which fits over the cross, and you see these in practically all the country churches in Yucatán. This one actually has embroidered here, Promesa de Señora Amaya Angulo to the Holy Cross, 3rd of May 2003. The 3rd of May is the Feast of the Holy Cross, and any construction work anywhere in Yucatán will have a cross on the top, decorated cross on the top, on the 3rd of May to honour the Day of the Holy Cross. Hoktun, we saw a set of lateral altars from Hoktun earlier, but more interesting in Hoktun is the cemetery, because it's like this all the way through. It's absolutely beautiful and incredible. Ich Mul, this is called. Is it possible to... Oh, where's Scott? He's gone. This is also in the municipality of Chiquins or not, and it was a Franciscan construction originally, which was taken from them after a few years and given to the secular clergy. In about 1625, there was a fire during the construction, and everything was destroyed except, miraculously, the crucifix, which was not burned, but the paint was blistered. And for that reason, it was called Cristo de las Ampollas, Christ of the Blisters. And it became the focus of a pilgrimage and an important cult in this church, until maybe 12 years later, someone decided to take it to Mérida. It's now in the cathedral and has been all these years. And the interest in Ich Mul declined. The work on the church continued for another 100 years, but it was never finished. And another church was built right beside it for the regular clergy, the secular clergy. So this is an unfinished church, not an abandoned one. I have to tell you a true story about Izamal. If I can find my notes, in 1559, Diego de Landa went to Guatemala to get 2 statues of the Virgin, one for Mérida and one for the Maya people of Izamal, and brought them back and gave one to Izamal. The of Valladolid said, the Maya of Izamal don't deserve this statue, they don't have any right to this, we want that statue, and they came and took it. They carried it as far as the outskirts of the city, when it became so heavy they couldn't carry it any further. And from that time dates the most important religious cult in Yucatán, the Virgin of Izamal. And she was so miraculous that every time there was a problem, an epidemic or a plague in Mérida, they went to Izamal, borrowed the Virgin, took her to Mérida, the plague stopped, the epidemic was cured, she returned to Izamal. I think she might be in the cathedral now permanently, but anyway. So here are the plaques recording her visits to this one says, María Santísima de Izamal travelled for the first time to Mérida in 1648 and apagó, put out, the peste, the plague, what does that say? Being patron of Yucatán, being proclaimed patron of Yucatán by the Bishop Marcos Torres de Rueda. This one records her visit in 1730. This one records her visit to the silver anniversary of the bishop of the time. So this is the story of the Virgin of Izamal, a true story, by the way. Here is the retablo of Izamal, and here is the doors leading to the dressing room, or camarín, behind the main altar. A special room where the Virgin can be dressed. The faithful like to embroider and make dresses and donate them to the church, and it's a great honour if the Virgin appears in one of their dresses. However, in 1829 there was a fire in the camarín and it destroyed everything in the church. This destroyed the camarín behind, which destroyed the original retablo here, all the side retablos, all the riches and treasures that had accumulated in Izamal because of the Virgin of Izamal, the patron of Yucatán. And this retablo dates from 1949. And it's wood and decorated, but in a Baroque style, but not original. The camarín behind was also reconstructed, redone. There's a civil group in Yucatán called Adopt a Work of Art, and they raise an enormous amount of money to help restore and preserve works of art throughout the state, and this is one of theirs. This was redone with paintings like the original paintings depicting the life of the Virgin. There's the Adopt a Work of Art, the restoration to its post-1829 condition. There was a town marked on a map called Cacanar, and the taxi driver took me to this town, but in fact there was no town. There was this church, which looks like a pretty impressive parish church, but in fact is just the private chapel of an hacienda. The hacienda is in ruins. There's no town here, there's nothing except a small modern house, and a man working in the fields that we called out to and said, "Can we go in and have a look at the church?" "Yes, of course." Opened the gate, let us in, and so we were able to take photos of the church. This is what it looks like. Inside it's completely abandoned and being overtaken by the forest. Can Shock is outside of Valladolid, and this was the state of the church when I first went there. Shortly, in the years before I went, 20 years ago, this church had been struck by lightning 3 times, and the locals were worried because this was their refuge in times of hurricanes or storms or whatever, and they obviously were worried that they were all gathered there during a hurricane and the building fell in on top of them. So they said, "Would you please restore this church because it's our refuge?" And so they did, and this is the restored church. You can see here the royal symbol, the double-headed eagle with its wings spread. It's amazing how it's come from this to this. The workmen here are incredible in the way that they can bring these churches back to life. Here's the original carving of the double eagle, the double-headed eagle. Here is the original belfry, and at the bottom here is written, "And the Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us," in Latin, which is from St. John's Gospel, which is read on Christmas Day here. Here's the interior of the church. The retablo was restored, and it's beautiful little church. This is Mama, the Church of the Assumption. Now, the Encyclopedia of Yucatán says, "Yucatán was not distinguished for its riches in past epochs, and so it constituted a great effort to realize the magnificent altars that adorned the churches. But the year 1915 arrived, and with the persecution of the clergy during the government of General Alvarado, the uncultured masses, incited by their savage leaders, destroyed in a few months almost the entirety of the artistic treasure of the state." Salvador Alvarado was sent from Mexico City to bring Yucatán under control during the revolution, because Yucatán wanted to go its own way. He was vehemently anti-clerical, and he allowed his troops to destroy the retablos. It says here, "Some of these altars, converted into firewood, ended up feeding the fires of the locomotives that transported military contingents, as happened with those of Valladolid. In fact, the retablo of the cathedral was destroyed at that time by him and his men, and he used the churches for stables or barracks or whatever. And those retablos that survived by chance as much as anything. So this is, Mama lost its original retablo. Here is a good example of a little cloister which has been restored, and here is the noria, or the water supply for the convent. Mani, St. Michael the Archangel, was one of the glories of the Franciscan time in Yucatán. This church, even early on, was famous for its school, famous for its singers. Here you can see the open chapel. There was a ramada here, 200 feet in length and 80 feet wide, for the indigenous to worship. They weren't allowed inside the church. But here in the patio, Fray Diego de Landa held his auto de fe, or Inquisition, on the 12th of July 1562. In this Inquisition, in the fires, he destroyed 5,000 idols, 13 large altar stones, 22 smaller carved stones, 27 rolls with hieroglyphs and signs, tons of books, and 197 vases of different sizes. So that was the Inquisition of Diego de Landa, who later wrote a book, maybe as penance, which is an invaluable guide to the language and customs of the Maya at this time. The convent remained in Franciscan hands until the completion of the War of Independence, 1821. On the 1st of October 1821, the government issued a decree telling the Franciscans to abandon all their churches. And today, I think Izamal is the only church still in Franciscan hands. But from 1821, they were not allowed to occupy any other church. This has been restored. Mani, in fact, now is one of the pueblos mágicos of Mexico, and it's a beautiful restoration. The church and the convent have been restored. This wall at the back was originally painted, and the paint was removed, and they discovered really beautiful mural paintings. That's in one of the altars here, and the cells on the second floor, above the church, and here is what's called the sarcophagus, carrying the body of Christ in procession, surrounded by angels carrying the implements of the passion and death of Christ. Beautifully restored, beautiful figures, I think. Here's my favourite retablo, an outside altar, the story of St. Anthony. Let me tell you this. One day a heretic told Anthony that he would believe that Christ was truly present in the Eucharist only if his mule bowed down before it. They established that the test would take place in 3 days. The heretic starved his mule for the next 3 days. When the appointed time had arrived, Anthony stood off to one side with the consecrated host in his hands. The heretic stood to the other side holding some fodder for the mule. The mule, ignoring its own extreme hunger, went before the Eucharist and knelt down before it. A true story. I believe that. This restoration of the church, funded by adoptive work of art, cost 3 million pesos. This is the mural that they discovered. This is the mural they discovered behind the main retablo when they removed the paint. Beautiful painting of St. Francis receiving the stigmata. You can just see here the red lines leading to the wounds in his feet. Here to the wound in his side. Here to one hand. So it's an important work of art. Here is St. Michael with his foot on the devil. Mashkanu is also St. Michael the Archangel, and this is a before and after. the restoration. The catalogue of religious construction says, in the niches of all the retablos, there were, until 1915, sculpted images which in the pre-constitutional period in which Salvador Alvarado was governor and military commander of the state were totally destroyed and incinerated, and a great quantity of rich jewellery, precious objects and ornaments disappeared. So, the restoration here cost 1.2 million pesos, and I was able to be there on the day that it was inaugurated. Below here, there's a crowd of people, which you can't see. But the restoration uncovered secret passages, hidden murals, lots of things that no one had known about. Here also, there's a beautiful sarcophagus with the angels bearing all the elements of the passion and death of Christ. I was in the taxi rushing back towards Yaxcabal to catch the bus back to Merida, and I mentioned to the taxi driver that I had information about a town in this municipality, but I couldn't find the town on any map that I had seen. Did he know it? And he said, yes, we can go there. And so speeding along, and suddenly veered off into the bush, and on this overgrown track, in about 100 yards, we came to this. Oh, I felt like Johnny Lloyd Stevens discovering a Mayan ruin. This was the church of Mopila. There's no town. The town was completely destroyed during the Guerra de Castas, the caste war in 1847. So there's no town, but there's this church, and there's an interesting story attached to this church, and it's a true story too. A campesino was returning from his milpa to his town when he met a beautiful lady walking past, and he greeted her friendly, and he felt this strange sensation as she passed. He didn't know that a few hours before, in the church at Yaxcabal, the people had discovered that the statue of the Virgin was missing, and they thought they'd been robbed. Well, what could they do? They couldn't find it. A little later still, campesinos returning home happened to pass by this old church, and on the altar saw the statue of the Virgin. And then they understood that the lady that they'd seen walking through the forest was the Virgin returning to her home. And so now, every year, on the 31st of January, I think, the 31st of July, the Virgin is returned to Mopila for, this is her home, and then goes back to Yaxcabal. It was interesting that a little while later I was reading a book from this library called Ambivalent Conquests by Inga Clendinnen, and she happened to mention this town in that book, and it was the first mention, apart from the catalogue, that I'd ever seen. And she quotes from a document called A Memorandum of What Must Be Verified in the province of Sututa, the 9th of September 1562. 1562 was the year of the Inquisition of Diego de Landa in Mani. Here, the village of Mopila is mentioned. She says, or the document says, in the village of Mopila, testimony revealed that at least 15 children had died in 8 separate sacrifices over 3 years. One Francisco Pot, villager of Mopila, a rich man, must be questioned about a boy called Akko. He either had brought up in his house or had purchased, and another called Chable to establish if he has them or if they are alive, or whether it is true that he had them at some other time. So the Inquisition was carried as far as this. What happened to them I don't know, but in the War of the Castes the town was attacked and completely destroyed. It's surprising that the church survived. It's said that it's an ancient tradition of the Virgin returning to her home in Montpilar, but from this it doesn't look as though that tradition is very strong. The place is overgrown. However, when we got inside, it looked remarkably clean. So we imagine something must have been going on. The retablo is intact, no paint, but it looks pretty good. And there's a cross here with a manga, which looks modern, so something is happening here. And then, preparing for this talk, I thought I better check what's happening in Montpilar, and there I find new photos of Montpilar. You can see that the retablo has been painted. There's a bit more of this than there used to be. The retablo has been painted, and here is the Virgin at home again in Montpilar. Motul. This is an old map from the 18th century. It's interesting, showing Motul and the towns around and their churches. Here is Merida. Here is Mushupip, Kakalchen, Tishkunchel, Kini, Semul, which we saw earlier, Uki, which we'll see later, and Telchak, Pueblo, not Puerto. Restoring Motul, this strange painting was discovered under another coat of paint, and no one knows exactly what it is. Here, a circle in a square with the four winds at the corners. There's a figure, a head here with a feathered cap, hands and feet, and a star in the centre. And this is what this is here, divided into 8, and each of those into 3, and each month has 2 of these partitions. Here you can see mediados de enero, fin de enero, mediados de febrero, fin de febrero, etc., right around to mediados de diciembre, fin de diciembre. So no one knows exactly what it is, but it's some sort of clock or calendar or astronomical guide or something. But it was an interesting discovery in Motul. Incidentally, Motul had the first Gallina Ciega that was built in Yucatán, the original, and also the first towers. I was in a combi, squashed in a combi. I hate travelling in combis. I squashed in a combi returning from Tishkakov to Merida, when it stopped at this little town which I knew nothing about, but there was this incredible church. So I jumped out, took this photo, jumped back in, went back to Merida and decided to learn something about this church in Nolo, it's called. The feast day was the 24th of August, and so I went back on that day and was able to see the parade and all the gremios with their standards here. Very exciting day, and you may have heard in your area when there's a festival, a patron saint of a church, or any kind of festival, leading up to, there are processions through the streets of the different guilds. They have their day each. And at on these processions, they're always letting off skyrockets. And here is an example of what these skyrockets are like. These are in Kusama, but they are delivered in packets like this, and they're all made in the town of Halacho, south of Merida. And the guilds buy these to celebrate whatever festival. Well, Nolo had bought 5 gross of these skyrockets. That's 720 skyrockets for their festival. However, the feast day was the 24th of August. On the 21st of August, a Category 5 hurricane entered Yucatán from the Caribbean side. And so the festivities were held over until they wondered what was going to happen. Hurricane Dean it was. And fortunately, it passed very quickly through the south of the peninsula, out through Campeche and off to Veracruz. And so, as we saw, the day dawned bright and clear, no hurricane. They could have the festival, but they had these 720 skyrockets to let off. And so here are these 2 men letting off the skyrockets in the patio of the atrium. This man here is lighting his skyrocket with a cigarette and holding it in his hand, lighting on. Yes. So that was an interesting experience.
Tony, about 10 minutes.
Okay. All right, let's rush through Pustonich. I went there to see the Festival of the Assumption. You can see this one has a Camino de Ronda, an impressive church outside of Tikal, but everything was set up for the festival. The makeshift bull ring was there, the stalls for food and all sorts of things, but the church was closed. So, well, I'll wait a little while, see what happens. Then a man arrived with a small group of women and said that they were going to clean the church, and he invited me to enter with him through the side door. So I was able to get in and see the interior of the church. And I said to him, I thought the churches were open every day during the festival. And he said, it should be, but this priest is very bad. We're always fighting with him. Okay. This is interesting because it's an altar that is purely Yucatecan. There's no fancy retablo, no Baroque, no historical association. It's pure Yucatecan religious sentiment. St. John the Evangelist here is dressed in Yucatecan. Here's Yucatecan embroidery. It's very, very Yucatecan. This Santa Elena is built on a Mayan pyramid base, which is why it's raised up. A group of Germans came to live here, but they didn't take well to the place, or the locals didn't take to them, and they left. But they left some of their children behind. And 100 years later, when the church was being restored, these children were found. They were under the floor of the church in their oak coffins, perfectly mummified. And these are now in a little museum at the back of the church. The church is interesting also because it's the only place in Yucatán, wrong way, that has these box retablos. These are portable retablos that the priest can take with him when he has to go and visit another town or another church. And they are unique to this church of Santa Elena. Sizbichen is a commissariat of Chumash, way out east, and an impressive looking church. No retablo, but a painting which is apparently of San Gabriel. The sacristan here spoke almost no Spanish. He was able to talk to my taxi driver in Maya while I took the photos. But while we were there, we heard a band approaching, and so we went out to give them a space, and here is the band with the gremio, 8 people here carrying their offerings for the Virgin of the Assumption, and they went in and put the offerings at the statue of the Virgin. Here is relleno negro and tortillas made in the town. The gremio left and the sacristan invited us to eat. So he took relleno negro and tortillas into the sacristy, found 2 chairs at a little table, a bucket of water for us to wash our hands, and left us there to eat. Well, I hadn't been in Yucatán for very long, and when they put this bowl of black stuff in front of me, I thought, what the hell is this going to taste like? Well, you've probably all tried relleno negro. It's absolutely delicious, and it was. And it was very interesting. When we left, the sacristan took me by the hand, put his head on my shoulder, and blessed me in Maya. It was a very, very moving experience. Sitil Pech is a commissariat of Izamal, painted just like Izamal. Here is the entrance to the cemetery, and here is another black Christ, Cristo Negro. The woman here is brushing the case with a branch to receive the blessing of Christ, and she will take the branch home to bless the house. The restorer of Ina says that this church contains one of the great artistic sacred treasures of not just Yucatán but of Mexico, and here it is. It's an original retablo. Everything about it is original. The colours, the painting, the base, everything. And the camarin behind is original also. All the walls are painted and the ceiling is painted. This is the ceiling. Here is an angelic orchestra playing Baroque instruments. Here is the Nativity of the Virgin, an angel fighting a dragon. I'm not sure what this one represents. And above these are the words, Todo pulcra es Maria. Maria is everything beautiful. You can see the word pulcra here. Pulcra. Hurricane Isidoro hit this church, and then it was restored, and this is the restoration, beautifully done, in Tahmek. Another church built on a Mayan platform, and this one was built by the secular clergy. You can tell because it has towers. After the dome at Chumayel fell, there was some new regulations for the Franciscan order. No Franciscan church was to have a dome over the sanctuary, and no Franciscan church was to have a tower for the bells, just an espadanya. So this one was built by the secular clergy. This, in 1870, someone said that this retablo is in such a poor condition that you can't see the saints, the pictures of the saints, for the dirt. And so 100 years later, they decided to clean it up and restore it. And when they did that, they discovered that these paintings were signed by Miguel Cabrera. Miguel Cabrera is one of the most famous painters of Mexico. He established the first school of painting in Mexico City. His works are all over the center of Mexico, in all the towns around Mexico City, in Franciscan convents and Dominican convents, Carmelite, Jesuit. Very famous, and it was a big surprise to discover his paintings here in Yucatán. And these are them. Tecanto is an example of a ground floor which has been restored and is often used as a community or cultural centre, like Mocas here in Merida. But the above has been left as it is, and it's a real pity, I think, because above there are still paintings, and I don't know whether anything's being done to preserve these. This is what it looks like. So, in Tequit, a virgin dressed as a mestiza. Very Yucatecan thing. This is the restored retablo in Tequit. There's a true story attached to this. Do we have time? No?
Yes.
Okay.
No, don't stop.
Okay.
Tell the true story.
Well, it is a true story, and that's why it's important that you know it. Let me just check the 1730 in Spain. The story begins when, on the first Saturday in Advent, a beggar woman presented herself at the convent in Seville and asked the brother there, whose name was Fray Francisco de San Buenaventura Martinez de Tejada Diez de Velasco. Did you catch that, Dan? Okay. Asked him for alms. She said that she and her son were poor, thirsty, hungry, naked. Fray Francisco didn't have much to offer her. She said, anything will do. We will repay it. Okay, we will meet again. He said, okay. He gave her the only coin that he had. She went away. 15 years later, he was appointed Bishop of Yucatán. And on one of his pastoral visits, he came to Junucmar, and outside of Junucmar is the town of Tetis. And so he visited Tetis. There were just a few families living there, but they had a statue of the Virgin. And when he saw the statue, he recognized this was the beggar woman that had asked him for alms in Seville. He bent to kiss the hem of her gown and discovered the coin that he had given her in Seville 15 years before. Now, that's a true story. And this is the church. He had this church built, and the cult of the Virgin of Tetis is very strong today. In fact, on the, I think this one is the 31st of January every year, the people in Junucmar ask if they can borrow the Virgin. And so the Virgin is walked 10 kilometers from Tetis to Junucmar. She stays there for 2 weeks and returns then to Tetis, always on a Monday. She won't return any other day. Okay. John Lloyd Stevens said, are there any ruins around here? And the priest said, well, there were, but they've been dismantled to build the church and the priest's house and all the houses in the village, so I'm sorry. So this church was built from Mayan stones, lost its roof, it's been abandoned. Here it is, the interior that you can see. It's very sad, really. And here are the Mayan stones that were used to build the church. Just like the Church of Jesus in Merida. Here are some paintings still. You should go to this church next Friday. It's one of the big festivals of Yucatán, the Three Kings. The church has been beautifully restored, and here are the Three Kings, and they'll be in procession next Friday, the 6th of January. It's a big, big festival.
Do you see them?
Tizzy Bin, yes. You can see here some strange markings on this church. Here's the gateway to the atrium. They were restoring the church when I was there, and this is what it looked like. And this is how it ended up. This is the church in Weimar. Extraordinary, no other like it in all of Yucatán. You can see here again the double-headed eagle, which is a symbol of the House of Asturias in Spain. There are 7 of these, 1 here, 2 up here, 1 here, and 2 on the other side. This is what it looks like after restoration. The baptistry, the choir. The roof is new, but instead of a slab, they actually constructed a vault to go over the church. This church is interesting because it's an example of a program called 3 for 1. I spoke to a woman here, and she told me that almost all the men of this town are in Los Angeles working, and the town lives on what they send back. The people in the town are trying to raise money to restore the roof of the church. The people in Los Angeles, with dances and raffles, etc., are raising money, and the government will also give them. So it's a program called 3 for 1, and that's how they hope. They need to raise 3 million pesos to restore the church. Let's skip over this. This is an abandoned church. It was actually on the map. So there was a town here once, but there's no town now, and there's nothing but this ruin. This is a Mayan town, which they believe is the centre of the world. There's a Catholic church, which is this one, and there's a Mayan church, which you have to be careful entering. I was able to get in by a side gate here, but as I was leaving, a young man with a government ID stopped me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm interested in the churches." And he said, "The locals don't like strangers going into their church." And I said, "Oh, okay. If you want to take photos, you need permission. But you can't get permission because the town office is closed." I said, "Okay, I'll leave." So I got in the taxi and off we went, and the taxi driver said to me, "The people in this town are well known for being very conflictivo. They're always causing trouble." I said, "Well, now you tell me." But I read later that these people believe in a world of gods, and for them there's a syncretism of Mayan and Christian beliefs. There's no difference between them. Shock Chill. I included this one to show you these mangas on the crosses, and Yucatecan crosses, you may have noticed, are always green. They're green because the green symbolises the Yaxche, or the saber, the sacred tree of the Maya, which is at the centre of the Mayan world. Okay? And so for this reason, crosses, which also indicate the 4 cardinal points for the Mayan, the crosses here are always painted green. So it's a nice combination of Mayan and Christian belief. This is the last one, I promise. The taxi driver brought me here, and we entered a property, and he tooted the horn and said, "This is private property, so we may need to get permission." Well, no one came, and so we got out of the car and started walking carefully towards this church, and then suddenly the taxi driver turned around and started running back, and I'm on the point of saying, "Don't leave me, don't leave me." And I noticed that his hazard lights had been left on and he was going back to turn them off. So we went to the church and we were able to go inside, and this is another church without a roof, but it looks in pretty good condition, and the paintings, the murals, look really good. It's amazing how these have survived without a roof, exposed to the elements for so long. And again, preparing for this, I thought I'll check to see what's happened to these murals, and I discovered that this church is now a restaurant. There it is. Apparently the hacienda is, I don't know, maybe the people have restored it, or it's been bought, or it's been turned into a boutique hotel, but the church now serves as a restaurant. There's the lady making tortillas, and this is, well, you can see a bit more of the church, and hopefully the paintings are preserved for all time. So this is Yashkaban. You can tell by the facade that it's not a Franciscan church, and I included this one to show you the atrium, and here blockhouses for the artillery to defend the church during the War of the Castes. And that's it. That's the end. I said that this was all 20 years ago, so if you ask me a question, there's no guarantee that I'll be able to answer it if it's not in my notes, but I'll try. Yes?
Were there some, I envy you your observational powers, very, very good.
Thank you.
And I wonder if there weren't some pueblos that you entered and you thought to yourself, ooh, I could live here. Do you remember any that stand out as places that you thought were just that kind of place?
No, there weren't. Sadly. Except for the famous ones, I think. I didn't include any of the famous churches because I imagine that you would have gone there as tourists or whatever. So Tishkokov and Izamal, for example. But places like that, yes, I can imagine living. In Tishkokov or Izamal, especially, yes.
Money?
Money, yeah, maybe, yes. Although there's not much, well, maybe there's a bit more now. It's a Pueblo Mágico, and I've tried to make a point of visiting Pueblos Mágicos when I can. So yes, probably money.
Are you still traveling by bus?
Sorry?
Are you still traveling by bus a lot?
Not now, no. I was 20 years younger then and very enthusiastic, and so it was a challenge actually to find the buses to go to all the different towns, and then in the town I had to find transport to all the visitas or comisarias, but usually, well, in the town itself, if I photographed all the chapels in the town as well as the main church, and in the town I would take a triciclo. These are the days when they were pedalled before they had motors, which was a bit more exciting, although if you got an older gentleman trying to pedal you around town, it was a bit embarrassing. But in the town, triciclo. Outside the town, for the commissarias, I usually had to take a taxi. Well, the taxis in the town operate like commis. They wait until they fill up and then they go off to the town that they're going to. But I was able to say, would you take me to these 3 towns? How much would you charge me? And they would give me a price, and if I liked the price, I would do that, and they would run me around the countryside. Yes.
A question about bells. Do you have any information about where they were attached
No, no, actually I don't know any of the bells in those churches. Sorry.
That pinkish colored church that you said was-
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Where was the pinkish colored church that you said had one of the most, one of the biggest treasures in it? You showed it to us, but you didn't tell us.
No. Louder?
The pink church, pink colored church that had, you said one of the greatest treasures in Mexico.
Ah, yes.
Where is it?
It's called Tabi.
That's the name of the town.
It's the name of the town, yes, yes. The church is very impressive. And as the man from Ina says, it has one of the great treasures of Yucatán. Set it up. Is that me? No. That's it? Very loud. Very loudly.
Yeah, just, I wanted to say, you mentioned that book, Ambivalent Conquest.
Yes.
Best history of this area that I've ever read. You know, a real, really good in-depth work. And anybody that's really interested in Frylanda and all of that period of history, excellent reading. I
Yes.
think they have it at the library.
Yes, it's in this library. Ambivalent Conquests by Inga Clendinnen. Yeah. It's a very interesting book.